Yeah, back with the one you see. Back with the time, don't wanna be. Back with the time, we're just tryna see. We can go outside, but we got the time to be. Back with the one you need. Back with the time to be free. Back with the lovers wanna see. We can go outside, but we gotta be free. Switch it, side, let me beat on side. Switch it, 6 figures now.
So we are back with another episode of Clash of the Titles.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
Adel, and this is
Kenny.
yeah, exactly. We'll be analyzing 2 records again today. And Kenny, what are those 2 albums we're doing?
Ooh, two really good, I'd say, modern classics. We got Frank Ocean's Sophomore Effort Blonde, one of the few records Pitchfork actually likes.
Yep.
See, now I don't have the vinyl, so I'm a little jealous that you pulled that out.
So
I'm gonna ignore that, but I'm very jealous you got that because I've been trying to find that for years, and it cost me $200 to get a good copy.
It's expensive now, but I was
yeah,
lucky to get one when they released it.
no.
But yeah, the second album. What are we doing right here?
I think we can show it to the lovely viewers at home.
Exactly.
It's Childish Gambino's "Because the Internet," another modern classic. Either little.
Yeah, because the
Great
internet.
record.
Childish Gambino. Yep.
And yeah, I mean, definitely thinking about these 2 records, I think that these are some of the most conceptual records I've heard. Definitely some of the most elaborate and ambitious. And I think just based on the research we've been doing, the fan reactions to both and the analysis and the interpretations are pretty diverse and pretty dynamic, especially because the internet. We were talking about that a little bit earlier. There's a lot of impact on how people interpret and dissect that album. That's really fascinating.
Exactly. There's like a whole concept and story behind because the internet. It's just not something you could just take at face value. There's like more to it, especially how even Childish Gambino, Donald Glover, he wrote a screenplay that coincides with the story that goes on the album.
Yeah, it's crazy because I remember listening to this record recently. The album itself is a lot more conceptual than I remember. Like, obviously, it's very conceptual driven, but it's crazy how like certain songs contain elements of other songs, how like there's references to other songs, how big the production is, like how like it fuses together all these elements. The songs kind of like get longer and longer, they get more diverse. And even the lyrics of the album, like there's so many layers and like riddles and metaphors, and I didn't really get a lot of it when I first heard the record way back, but listening to it again, you realize how constructed everything is. Like, there's nothing really accidental about it. It's pretty intricate and that's saying a lot for like a modern hip hop record. But it even goes beyond just that. It's really like it's like a musical novel,
like literary device behind it. And yeah, I agree too. When this album initially dropped, I remember taking it, yes, at like face value and hearing like the popular songs and the singles and just taking it as that. But I listened to it a bunch of times over the years, and finally, like, I realized like this is actually like a novel in a way, like a story that has so many different layers to it. There's a lot of things like someone's isolation and loneliness and yearning to find a relationship, a pure common connection with someone, but then also ties in all these themes with the internet and how it plays on people's interactions with one another and the internet's impact on society, and then how the internet also plays a role in how we portray ourselves or the way that we show ourselves to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest theme that stood out to me on this record from I think the most recent listenings is that I think it's like you said, isolation, technology. I also think it's identity, kind of like when you're on the internet or kind of with the social media era, how it's so easy to kind of immerse yourself into your own constructed reality. And the album kind of deconstructs that a lot. It's a lot about, how this identity kind of crumbles over time and the extent to which you go to kind of assimilate to that, even though it's not really who you are. And I think the album plays a lot around with that a lot musically and lyrically. I think, you hear songs like 3005 and it's talking a lot about the future and how about, how you can get a connection that can last that long. And then you hear songs kind of like Sweatpants and songs kind of like The Worst Guys. Like, they're all songs about identity in one form or another. And it's interesting how many different moods and themes they're able to kind of pack in, even in certain songs, like, that song Flight of the Navigator. It starts off as just like kind of more of like an indie kind of like ambient song, and then it kind of turns into kind of like this really like intimate kind of heartfelt song. And it's interesting how those transitions kind of, you don't really realize what they're going for at first, but then you hear them more and more and you realize there's a lot more of a purpose and a lot more of an ambition to it than you kind of suspect initially.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that a lot of these songs, yeah, you just can't really take it at face value. You really need to re-listen to it in terms of the context and the sequence of the album to fully, understand like the themes and meanings behind it. You kind of just take it as how you listen to it. Like, yes, that song has like a bunch of different moods and beat switches, but then when you feel and listen to the whole context of it and the meaning behind it, when it ties in with the other songs and the themes, you finally understand. And like, yeah, it's really someone who just goes through like all these kind of like existential crises and identity crises in a way, and how all these different factors like the internet and your relationships with people kind of play an impact on your own well-being in a way.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the song that stood out to me the most, I think, on repeated listens. I mean, it was a song I liked a lot when I first heard the record, but like initially, I'm not gonna lie to you, when I used to listen to the record a lot, I kind of criticized that song. I thought it was, oh, it's a little overlong, it's a little uneven. I don't get how this all adds up together. But I think now that I kind of give it a second run through, or however many times I've heard the album in the years, because I've heard it quite a few times, I think it makes a lot more sense, because that's how my internet is. 1 minute you're getting information this way, but the next you're kind of getting it the other. And other songs too. I mean, there's that one song, "The World Star," early in the record, and that song is very chaotic and dark, and it's all about the dangers of like being a bystander on the internet and social media, and how we perpetrate that, and kind of like how far we go to that. And it's interesting how like those songs, like they switch up moods, and how like it can go from being this very gothic, very like intense record, to also being sometimes very serene and hopeful record. Like that song "Shadows," it's a very carefree, breezy song, but then halfway through you realize that it's not quite that. And there's like a layer of emotion and a layer of melancholy that is hidden underneath that, was waiting to kind of be discovered. So stuff like that makes this record, I think, no matter how many times you hear it, there's always something to kind of pop out and kind of reveal that this record, I think, it has multitudes to it. It's not just one simple listen, like you said. It's very much like an opera. So many different parts and sections and structures.
I agree with that. Like, perfect example, you mentioned World Star. It really does play or emphasizes the whole internet culture perfectly, where it's like, yeah, being a troll in a way, or yeah, the whole big internet meme of around that time when this song and album was released was World Star. You see something crazy going on, someone just like pulls out their phone and they scream World Star, World Star.
Yeah, but I mean,
it's like some shit's about to go down and you got to film it. And it's like, yeah, you're basically being a bystander and just kind of contributing to something that's kind of dangerous in a way. People like that, in my opinion, are more detrimental to culture than actually the people who would take action in a way, I guess, or something for a more positive way. But just a perfect summary of like how the internet culture is like.
Definitely, man. Yeah, I mean, it's very much a very unique commentary on that. But I feel like it's not just a commentary on that. I feel like it's kind of using that as a springboard to explore themes of, like we talked about the loneliness theme, isolation, identity, trying to find a sense of purpose. It's very much an album that is a lot more narrative driven than I expected. Like, it is conceptual, but there is actually a genuine motivation, I think, that the songs are trying to reveal. And even if it doesn't seem that way in the beginning, I mean, obviously people who have heard the album aren't always reading the screenplay, but it does feel cinematic. Like even that song Oakland, starts off, with somebody listening to a song on the radio, and then halfway through it's somebody like, they hear the song and it kind of sparks all these emotions and desires in them. Like even that's a very cinematic, very structure. And, and a lot of songs, it could be a risk, that could be kind of a gimmick, but here it kind of works and actually ties into the theme, I think, pretty seamlessly.
Exactly. Yeah. It's good you mentioned that, because I think that's my favorite song off the album, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say that song has arguably is the one that aged the best. I mean, all of them are very strong songs, but that one I think definitely hits very particularly hard.
Telegraph Avenue. By Lloyd.
Avenue. That's right. It's like a song within a song.
Yeah, that's exactly, yes, the full title. It reminds me of Telegraph whenever I see that title. But yeah, that's
Telegraph, baby.
Yeah. But yeah, exactly. That song ties in those themes about isolation and, the relationships, because it's basically like a guy yearning for some girl he likes, and he literally travels from LA to Oakland, which is literally 8 hours. It's a long trip. That's literally from northern LA. And then by the end of it, he just gets rejected and is just like, is a hopeless romantic in a way, really. And it ties in, yeah, those whole themes of isolation and stuff, and one's idea of finding a true connection with someone, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the crux of the album. I think every song, one way or another, is kind of hinting at that. And it's interesting because it's actually a lot more of like Childish Gambino now is known more for like a soul funk kind of R&B aesthetic as he is more so than kind of the more indie hip hop aesthetic he kind of cultivated early on. But that soul and R&B element kind of shows up here more than I expected. I mean, songs like Pink Toes and Earn
Yeah,
even
yeah.
Shadows, like the R&B funk influence. I mean, it's interesting. Even back then, it was still kind of prominent. So it almost kind of sets up the foundation for the rest of his career, while kind of like showing a very much a genuine progression of. Because I mean, it's such a 180 from anything he put out before this. I mean, it makes Camp was semi-conceptual, but nowhere near what Internet attempted to do.
Yeah, basically, yeah, you could, as you said, like the more R&B influenced tracks on this album. Yeah, he's basically like planting seeds of what his future sound was going to be. Like he was giving us little breadcrumbs, like right there, because like, yeah, you could say from the previous projects of his, like Camp, he's straight up dropping bars, rapping, hip hop album, yeah, with some concepts in there. I think because the internet is really his first foray into a more diverse sound, really. Not only just doing this traditional hip hop, dropping R&B kind of sounds, like some funk kind of sounds too here in the future albums like Awaken My Love. Yeah, also the whole experimental nature of the production too, that plays a role. The tone of the songs, just all the experimentation plays a role on how the tone is set for the album, really.
I mean, it's the experimental thing you go back to is a big thing, because I noticed a lot of the songs I think definitely defy typical structure. Like I think there's that one song laid onto the record called, I think it's like Stockholm Information, I believe is the name of the song. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's the title of it. And it's very much a simple song, it's really more just choruses and harmonies and very simple minimalist beat, but then all of a sudden it switches and it's very synthy and it's kind of ambient. So it's like similar to what 808s and Heartbreak did for Kanye in a record that whether you love it or hate it, it kind of creates its own sonic palette, because the internet kind of does that too. I mean, it's very much its own kind of sonic universe. And, some people really love it and some people kind of feel like a little confused and think it's convoluted, but no matter what you think about it, it is entirely on its own terms in that regard.
Say it's like an album that stands out in its own way because the whole concept behind it. There's literally a screenplay that tells a separate story for it too. If you want to listen to this album and know the meaning of it, you have two different ways of approaching it. You can listen to the album, and then if you actually read the screenplay, you kind of have to tie in the album with the screenplay. And on the screenplay, there's basically this protagonist that Donald Glover made, who's called the Boy, and he's basically, from what I've understood, they say that he's a rich kid who is the son of Rick Ross or something like that. And he's basically an internet troll in a way. Like he'll go on these websites like Hot New Hip Hop or World Star or something and just be a troll and just trash on whatever rapper is on there. That's from what I read from my research about it. Still plays into the whole themes of internet portrayals, or your image you portray on the internet, on social media and stuff. And yeah, it just makes you think about the people who really troll on the internet too. It's like, why are you doing this? What is the gain you get out of it? Obviously you're spreading negativity on the internet. How do you see yourself really outside of the internet in real life? The persona you build on the internet in per se is a facade of who you really are, really. Or it could be actually how you feel on the inside, that you're not really projecting in real life, and the internet is the perfect outlet for lots of people to just express what they think. And yeah, it's like I said, it's just the interpretation how the internet impacts us and how it impacts society is really evident on this album.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I like that point a lot, because I think that the record ties into a lot of that, and I think that it takes a very timely theme and makes it personal. I think that's what its biggest success is, that it could have easily just been a record of like, abstract themes and experiments, and it does have a lot of that, but ultimately I think it's a very human record that really just gets to the core of like what it means to really be honest with yourself. And obviously it's not a record that gives you a lot of easy answers, but I think the journey to get it is kind of very much a unique one and engaging.
very engaging story that goes along with it, a very engaging narrative. And I've just, even when I was studying this for the past few days, I still found myself re-listening and re-listening to it just to get like the pure meaning behind it, because there's just so, like I said, it's like there's so many things that you need to grasp onto and to think about and conceptualize in your mind and like see how this plays out and everything.
Definitely.
Like, I'm still learning things about it when I'm
Yeah,
listening
that's
to
the thing.
it.
Even so many. I mean, I first heard this record in 2016. Even several years later, it's like I'm like kind of countering your point. Like just like you're always finding something fascinating and new about its production or its storytelling or the perspectives. I mean, yeah, it's a record that kind of it's almost like the internet itself. Like no matter how much time you spend on it, there's always something new to discover on it.
Exactly. That that basically perfectly sums it up. It's like, yeah, because of the internet, you're just discovering these new things
Ah,
about it, like and stuff. But yeah, also the title, because the internet, it definitely plays in with how we feel about things and the way we act and how we approach certain things. One aspect that a lot of the songs mention are intimacy and relationships with people, and how a certain internet culture ties into the way that people approach such thing as interactions with people and relationships. And yeah, that's basically one aspect I got out of some of the songs.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because we're comparing this record to Blonde, and I think Blonde's another record that also very much explores similar themes, not so much through the internet lens, but I think it's more through a more personal and intimate perspective. But they're both records about connection and intimacy.
Yeah.
And when I went to go back to hear Blonde, I noticed Blonde, in a lot of ways, they're the most similar in that they're kind of tackling big concepts and unique sounds. If you look past a lot of that, they're both records just about kind of like human beings. They're both very human records that are kind of exploring their themes through an abstract perspective to get to a more intimate kind of lens. So I mean, looking at Blonde and the songwriting and storytelling, they're both records I think that are very narrative driven. They're both very honest. But I think Blonde is different in that I think Blonde is stripped down because of the internet. There's a lot of concepts and experiments, but Blonde is more, if not understated. Blonde I think cuts a little bit deeper into its transparency, and I think in terms of songwriting, I think Blonde could sometimes get even more deeper because I think it's getting you so raw into these emotions and these perspectives. So I mean, I think comparing the songwriting to the two, what was your take on hearing Blonde's songwriting and Blonde's concept when you're kind of stacking it up against because the internet's?
Blonde has a more raw and emotional emphasis on the songs and the production. Like, yeah, the production is very minimal at times, you know. It's not like because the internet where there's production is very heavy on there that kind of sends you like in a trip in a way. Blonde production and lyrics, it's more raw. It like cuts and hits you right away, really.
Mhm.
It really puts you in certain emotions, and that's what Frank Ocean really does. He's very raw and honest. He develops these songs that people just connect with, and he focuses on like a lot of, you know, intimate and relationships, and whether it's heartbreak, all that stuff. He's really a master at doing that, really just unlocking emotions and getting emotions from people, really.
I mean, I think what really struck me about Blonde is that even when in the opening track, when you don't hear his natural voice, it's, you know, it's corrected voice for the majority of it, and then halfway through the first opening track, his actual voice comes in. It's
Mhm.
almost like he's kind of dropping his armor, and I think that that's what he does the whole rest of the record. Even when there are sound effects and pitched vocals and production flourishes, you know, he's really not putting any personas or really hiding behind the concept. Like he is throwing himself out there. And Blonde is interesting too because it has a song called Facebook Story. And I think they're both records about alienation and about isolation, about individuality. And Blonde, I think, differs is that Blonde, like you were saying, is stripped down. But I also think it's more of a record that is focusing on the more intimate moments. I think because the internet is kind of tackling bigger and grander themes and kind of going for like bigger statements. I think Blonde is not it's not a record that's necessarily making statements, even though it is a statement in its way. But I think it's capturing moments and it's capturing the emotions in between those moments. When you look at a song like Siegfried, you know, it's a simple song. You know, it's not like a big, majestic, grand track, but you know, the emotional buildup and the songwriting and the vocals. I mean, they do kind of take you on a journey.
Yeah, that's right. Frank Ocean really puts in a lot of intimate themes. You know, he talks about heartbreak a lot or past relationships that he reminisces about. There's so many intimate sounding songs on here, like Pink and White,
You know, like definitely.
Ivy, Self Control. Skyline to just all these songs are very, very intimate and perfectly describe the mood of things where, yeah, it just talks about intimacy and his feelings towards his experiences with relationships with people.
Yeah, I mean, musically, I think too, Blonde, similar to Internet, kind of combines genres. Like they're both albums that I think kind of float between genres. I mean, Blonde has songs that kind of have like an alternative rock edge. There's songs that are more gospel, songs that are a little more R&B and pop-ish, songs that are a little more intimate, a little more lo-fi.
Yeah.
In terms of musicality and production, comparing the two records here, which one do you think stands out a bit more musically? Which one do you kind of think kind of goes for broke on that? Because I feel like both of them do a lot musically, but clearly I think one record more than the other, I think, is playing around with that form a bit more.
That's actually a good question. When I think of like Because the Internet and Blonde, I really think that Because the Internet really has the more maximalized production compared to Blonde. Blonde is very stripped back. And yeah, it does have those moments where it's very experimental and mind-boggling in a way. For example, the song Nights. Like that's like one of my favorite songs on that album. And the beat switch just really just blows your mind. Like in the first half of the song, you really just have like this kind of like hip hop R&B style song, you know, just kind of trappy in a way. But then it has like that build up of like that guitar or synth or whatever is playing in the middle, just like kind of building up, and then it just flips like the whole beat, and it's so like with the keyboards, and it's so intimate and relaxing sounding, and it kind of flips the mood of the song too. That's the part of the song where he's like very reminiscent about his past or his relationships with people. I remember specifically on that second half of the song, he's like thinking about his past. He had to move from Louisiana because of Hurricane Katrina, and he was, I think he lived in Texas or something like that. I remember that's like one of the lyrics, but it really just flips the mood of the song. One way of like the first half of the song is he's still thinking about being with someone and just enjoying the nights with them, just thinking about that kind of stuff. But then the second half of the song, it's more intimate and more reminiscing, thinking back in the past and wishing to go back to those times in a way. Kind of the same subject matter, but the whole mood switches with that beat switch.
That song, I think, was one I was going to mention. I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah. Because that song kind of encapsulates a lot of Blonde's approach. It's an album that I think builds a lot of crescendos, and then once those crescendos kind of hit, the album kind of reveals a new layer or a new texture that wasn't necessarily seen on the first listen, but kind of reveals more of a humanistic and kind of like reveals a theme that wasn't necessarily as obvious as the outset. And I think Blonde has a lot of moments like that. I mean, you have songs like Godspeed, which is like this classical gospel number. You have White Ferrari, this kind of more intimate, kind of ambient, kind of atmospheric song that's very heartbreaking and very like soulful. I mean, you have songs like Pink and White. It's orchestral, has a lot of flourishes. It's kind of a bit of a contrast compared to some of the more, you know, understated tracks. And you have an Ivy. Ivy's like this pulsating alternative rock track, but, you know, it descends into this kind of cathartic kind of emotional number. So all of these songs, I think, kind of start off as one thing and kind of evolve into another. When they do evolve, it subverts the expectation of the listener. But I think ultimately it's Frank kind of finding a way to either open up his lyrical and musical palette and kind of dig at something deeper than maybe we initially would suspect in these songs.
Yeah, I agree with that. His approach to it is always very open and honest with his lyrics, and he's someone who isn't afraid to really show emotion in the tracks. Just even the way he approaches his style of singing and stuff is just very heart-wrenching in a way, and just very emotional. And
for sure.
So it's, you could feel that emotion too when you hear him sing. So yeah, like songs like Ivy is like one of the most emotional songs on the album, really, and it's like right in the beginning too. So you're hearing a song about like a heartbreak and stuff, and it's like, all right, where do we go from here? Really, what else does he have to say about really like how sad can it get from now or something like that?
What's also interesting about these records too, and I'm looking back at it, they're both very much, I think, driven by the concepts and ideas that their lyrics present. And in terms of songwriting, I mean, Childish Gambino, Donald Glover, and Frank Ocean are two very different and distinct writers in the way they kind of explore themes and topics. From a songwriting perspective, what did you notice about the two of these records when you kind of put them side by side? What were some elements or ideas that kind of sprung out to you about them?
Like I mentioned before with Because of the Internet, at face value, when you listen to it, you think it's just the way that how the internet impacts you and impacts relationships. And then also there's the whole thing about common themes of finding connections with people and being your genuine self, or you surround yourself with people just because they want you in a way, like you're say you're famous or you're very popular or something. It's like being around real genuine people, or trying to find that, but you're always around by like surrounded by fake people in a way from because of the internet. With Blonde, yeah, Frank is just very open about, like I said, just his past relationships with people and heartbreak he goes through, and reminiscing about good days and trying to kind of recapture that in a way. In a sense, I could say that because the internet is more of like yearning for something genuine and true. Meanwhile, Blonde is an album that is wanting to go back to a certain feeling or how the way things were with others.
Yeah, I think both analyses are pretty accurate to the records. I think songwriting wise, I think what makes them both, I think, kind of kindred spirits is that both of them, I think, are very much records that can be introspective, but they can also kind of encapsulate, I think, bigger themes and do so at the same time. Like there's certain songs on because of the internet that are talking about a multitude of things, but also still feel transparent and relatable. And Blonde does that too, even if it does so in a simpler manner. I mean, there's songs on Blonde where it does kind of hint at like deeper themes of like identity and, you know, desire and loneliness and how we kind of isolate ourselves from people in society and how we don't always say what we mean. But it also manages to kind of be organic and kind of hint at something simpler. And I think both albums do it. I think with Frank's records, sometimes I think he kind of honed in on more specific emotions and insights in a more kind of concentrated manner. And I think Donald Glover, because the internet really kind of sprawls the canvas. And sometimes one can argue he takes them too much, but I think that's kind of the appeal and that's kind of the nature of the record, that it kind of has to take on too much to kind of fit those themes in. But I think both records really use their space to address a lot of unique and relevant ideas. And I think they really take a lot of risks. And I mean, whether you like these records or not, I think the risks definitely make them more distinctive and more, I think, relevant than they would be if they didn't.
I would agree with that. I would say that Donald Glover is very ambitious in anything he does. You could see the album he put after Because of the Internet, Awaken My Love, was just a complete 180.
Oh yeah, Gorgeous, like a funk soul kind of like 70s record. Definitely a unique switch over for sure.
And with Because of the Internet, it talks about general themes really. Meanwhile, Blonde, like you said, yeah, coming from a more intimate perspective, more personal perspective. So those are really two differences too that stands out with it.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, and I think the beauty of both is that they both manage to take you on equally immersive journeys. In terms of them being listening experiences, in terms of like being records that you listen to front to back, what stood out to you about the two in terms of like the structure, in terms of like accessibility, in terms of like which record did you kind of find a little more of a fluid listen through when you went back to the two?
I would say Blonde is the more fluid record because it's just straight to the point really. You get this whole feeling and of the emotions and the messages behind the songs. They just kind of are very similar to one another really. It's not like Frank is really telling a story in a way, but they're all just like ideas of how he feels basically, and from his past experiences of, you know, relationships and connections with people. Because of the internet, yeah, there's so many layers to it that it had me going back so many times really just to see the sequencing and the fluidity of the tracks from one another. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of interludes that tie in the tracks on that album, but there's a deeper meaning behind that album that I have to re-listen to it to get the true meaning behind it.
Yeah, I actually think that's a point that I was going to make too, and I'm glad you brought it up. When I went back to hear Because of the Internet, their most recent time, I noticed it was kind of something that you kind of had. It was something that you could listen to all the way through, but it takes a bit of time to digest, and it's very much structured like a novel. I think it has halves and chapters, and I think the first half of the record I think is very strong in that it's kind of this very much a hip hop, kind of R&B, almost kind of indie record. And the second half is more ambient and more experimental. Then it kind of finishes on kind of a more mix of the two. It kind of combines some aspects of the earlier sounds and kind of goes into more of a maximalist approach. And it's very strong and very emotional and very ambitious, but it does, I think, sometimes require a bit more extra attention and patience. Where Blonde, I think it is a bit of a longer record, and I admit some songs are stronger than others. But I do think that its pacing is sometimes a bit more concise and a bit more, like you said, fluid and a little more organic, because I think that it's kind of basing its momentum off of a more emotional type. So I think each song's kind of ideas and insights are kind of propelling you into the next one. Whereas because of the internet, I feel like it's like a chapter in a book. Like it's giving you a whole new set of information with each song. So it's very exciting and powerful, but sometimes takes a bit more time to unfold. But the rewards are very much rich on both records, but both kind of require a bit of a different type of effort. But I mean, if I had to edge it out, I'd give it to Blonde. But I mean, I admire internet's just ambition because of how much effort and how much craft it takes to kind of put something like that together.
Exactly. I totally agree with you with that. Yeah, like you said, the first half of Because of the Internet's more like very hip hop, R&B. A lot of like the more popular songs and the singles are on the first half of the album too. Then the second half kind of transitions into more the conceptual based songs that tie in the themes. So yeah, the second half of the album is more patience is really needed for Because of the Internet to fully understand the themes and the meanings. And yeah, like I said, Blonde is more just straightforward and to the point, and it's just more emotion based.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that that's the beauty of both records is that at the end of the day, they both take you on a journey. I mean, Blonde gives you kind of this look into Frank Ocean's kind of personal life, but it also kind of casts this very unique musical backdrop that can be kind of stripped down and can be sparse, like you mentioned, but also kind of, I think, reflects a lot of growth on his half. It's definitely a different record than Channel Orange. I think Channel Orange actually, I feel like almost kind of feels a bit more like because internet and how conceptual and maximalist some of those songs sound. But Blonde, I think, kind of does the inverse and manages to kind of actually somehow sound more ambitious in a way. I think because of internet, I think from where he started with Camp is a complete 180 and very much this big sonic kind of experiment and this big kind of sonic epic as well. But I think both records managed to kind of find their artists progressing and taking risks and kind of forming their own artistic identities while also kind of in a way revealing kind of them at their most ambitious. So I mean, in terms of the ambitions of both records, how do you think each record kind of realized them, and which one do you think was more successful in kind of seeing that to the fullest?
I do agree that those two albums are really what set the tone for each respective artist for their craft and the way that they progress with their music. Yeah, Because the Internet, really heavy on the concept, really ambitious record. It really did transition Donald Glover with his vision of like the approach of conceptualizing an album and his sound too. Same with Frank Ocean too, like you mentioned. Yeah, with Blonde, it's pretty much different from Channel Orange too, because even if you even date back to Nostalgia Ultra, the mixtape people released before Channel Orange, they both kind of sound very similar in a way. But then Blonde is really a switch up in terms of production and style. Yeah, it's definitely a more emotional record, more personal record. Even the record technically before Blonde was Endless, and that is an album that is more production heavy, more ambient, more experimental. It doesn't really emphasize on lyrics too much, but there are still some songs on that album that really are very similar to Blonde, which are very emotional and very personal. So I would just say that with Blonde is a progression in terms of Frank's songwriting style and his approach to music, because yeah, like I said, it's more personal, more intimate. He's more open about certain topics, and he just is more not afraid to speak on like emotional issues in a way.
Yeah, I think that ties to a lot of it. I mean, that kind of leads into my next question, was that both these records, I think, were considered kind of high marks for the respective artists. They both got a lot of critical acclaim. They got a lot of positive fan response. They both kind of signified a lot of artistic breakthroughs for the two of them. In terms of impact and reception, which record do you think kind of left more of an immediate impact on the industry and on pop culture? Because both of these records, I think, very much stand as works that a lot of people who are connoisseurs of the culture seem to kind of reflect as high standards. So which one did you see kind of shift the conversation a bit more?
Yeah, both albums like did make an impact, and still to this day people go back to it and trace them back to like these two albums or albums that stood out in their respective years. But I think Blonde is the one that really made a big impact immediately, really.
Absolutely.
Because even the whole story behind Blonde being released was really crazy in its way too, because I'm not sure if you know this, but Frank Ocean, he actually had a deal with Def Jam before when he released Channel Orange. He was signed there.
I
And
remember
a
that.
way for him to get out of Def Jam to fulfill the contractual obligations, he had one more album to release. So he released Endless, basically. So that got him out of the contract. And then he dropped Blonde right after, which was
I
on his
remember that.
own independent label. So that really shook things up, really, from a music industry perspective. That's just a crazy power move in a way. It's like
Oh, definitely.
Endless is, out of the two, of course, Blonde is the more superior one, but Endless is a great album. I would say, honestly, if we're making comparisons between those two, Blonde is to Kid A how Endless is to Amnesiac. Both are great albums, but one is like considered the more superior one. The other one is, I wouldn't say is the inferior, but it's really good in its own way too, for the way that it is released and its intentions and mood and message it tries to get through. Endless was a great album, but he was saving the best album for his own. Let's just say that. So
I mean,
his own
there's
release.
no shame in that.
Yeah. So yeah, Blonde definitely made an impact immediately from that perspective, from just a music industry perspective, and then just from a music perspective, it definitely made a strong impact too. You have a lot of artists who are influenced by Frank Ocean, who tackle these, very emotional themes behind their music. I would say, yeah, someone like James Blake, I say is the white Frank Ocean. But James Blake is a really good artist in his way too. But I always say he's the white Frank Ocean because they're just very emotional and their production styles are always crazily good and amazing.
Oh, definitely. Always doing something unique and dynamic.
Yeah, and James Blake, he even had a role in writing Godspeed or producing Godspeed, I think. And he even released his own cover of it recently too. So, which is beautiful too. Another artist that I would say is influenced by Frank Ocean is someone like Daniel Caesar, who's like very emotional too, and his lyrics are very.
I definitely see that as well.
Very intimate sounding artist too. So you could say like, yeah, the impact on that album definitely played a role in a lot of artists who are in R&B, pop, hip hop in a way too.
And it's funny we're talking about Childish Gambino because I even know Blonde came out after because the internet. I think the Frank Ocean's Channel Orange record set the template for Because of the Internet, which kind of took a lot of that conceptual and I think genre fluidity and ambition and kind of instilled its own take on it. And I think when you said about Blonde is that Blonde songwriting and Blonde's, I think, introspection and musical fluidity did set a standard. A lot of artists did seem influenced by that. A lot of artists, like you're saying, Daniel Caesar, James Blake, a lot of hip hop artists, a lot of even R&B and indie artists took a lot of cues from that. I think a lot of records now are kind of constructed like Blonde. They're very intimate, but release a lot of fanfare. But there also seem to be records that aren't afraid to take chances and kind of be very expansive sonically, while also kind of trying to do something more mature and more artful and kind of more honest. And I think that both records set the standard of you can do big ideas and big musical experiments, but also still be relatable. So it's hard to kind of say which one is more impactful, but I kind of will side with you on the fact that I think Blonde had a more immediate impact on how albums can be created, constructed, and how artists can kind of take chances and progress and still kind of maintain their identity. And I think Blonde is a record that I think to this day is still a masterpiece. And even though somebody argue is it a flawless record or not, it's definitely a record whose staying power is immense. And same with Because of the Internet, it's a record that I think is uniquely its own. And I think that staying power, even though Childish Gambino has released so many great records after that, I'm not quite sure if any of them have quite ever surpassed the heights of Because of the Internet.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Yeah, I think for Gambino, Because the Internet is that album is the one that's going to stand out the most. Help them, transition into becoming more of a diverse artist in a way. It really showed his musicality, his diversity it stands out in his discography as the turning point in his musical career, really. And yeah, same for Blonde too. It's really the album that really, I mean, Frank Ocean was already, acclaimed before Blonde. Like a lot of critics loved him. People were already influenced by him by that point, but Blonde really just showed his masterful skills really in his approach.
Absolutely.
So
it's crazy how like after Blonde, it was such a record that came in such a mysterious manner. And it's interesting too because he has yet to release a proper follow-up record. But it's funny how even 5 years later, they're based on that record alone. I think people still look at him as like this visionary artist because of how much craft and care and complexity he imbued. And same with Gambino, even when there was that gap from Because of the Internet to Awaken My Love, I think a lot of people wrote off of the strengths of both records. So both artists, I think, established a lot of goodwill with these records. I mean, like we were talking about throughout this conversation, carved their own artistic progressions out of both. And I think a lot of them, no matter what they release after that, I think a lot of them will be looked at for defining achievements. So I think kind of segueing into that, what about these two records do you think makes them, and we talked about a lot of different elements, what do you think at the end of the day really makes these records stand out? Because so many albums try and do this type of stuff, you know, social commentary, introspective songwriting. What about it, Internet and Blonde, do you think that truly makes them stand out and that really made people latch onto these?
I think it's the way that people connect with it, really. The connection that people feel from when they hear the songs on the album, songs on both respective albums that just kind of blow you away, takes you back and just makes you reflect a bit. The instant gratitude you receive from just hearing these songs, just like how great they sound, and put a lot into it, and just the way how people could relate to the songs on the albums. People resonate with a lot of these songs on both of the records.
Definitely agree. And I think that what makes these two records kind of stand out a lot is that both of them, I think, come from very honest places. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I think they're records that are speaking to what we all want as people. I think that the Internet does come with a lot of literary and musical riddles to kind of dissect, but I think at the end of the day, it's really just about human connection and kind of staying authentic and trying to realize how important that is. I think that the same thing goes for Blonde. Blonde is a record about nostalgia, regrets in your past, and moving forward and getting connection and kind of facing your future. And I think both records, even though they seem fairly different on the surface, I think both of them explore similar themes in different canvases. And I think at the end of the day, their greatest achievements aren't just the musical and the production choices and the songwriting choices, but the emotional choices. I think both of them managed to be very much two of the most personal records I've ever heard of. And to do so with such artistry and such depth and such ambition. Yeah, I mean, not every record can pull that off, and these two records do.
Yeah, I totally agree with like everything you just said there. It's just really just both albums really tackle on connections with people and wanting something that's pure and genuine, or just wanting to go back to a time which was happy and better in a way.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I know we've given the title of our segment. You know, we talked a lot about how great these records are and a lot about what they both individually accomplish. But there has come to that point where we got to do the final showdown. So if we're stacking the two of these up, and we got to take one, and we got to choose just one record, which one you choosing and why?
Blonde.
That was easy.
Hands down, Blonde. Really, it's like Blonde is one of my favorite albums of all time. I would say it's like a desert island disc for me. It's like one of my favorite albums, really. You just connected with so much, just love the production, love Frank Ocean's singing and writing. Yeah, I mean, I'm heavily biased. Let's just say that. I really love that album because the Internet is a great album too. It's like one of my favorite albums that's come out within the past decade. It's probably my favorite Gambino record, but if we're comparing the two, I'm just gonna take Blonde. Really.
That's fair. That's fair. I would say, I mean, this is a tough decision for me because they're both excellent records, and as we've stated in this video, there's so much to digest and take away, and they both really do so much, and they're such connective records that really have aged pristinely. I don't know which one I want to take. I mean, I love Internet, one of the first records I fell in love with, one of the first records I ever bought for my car, fun fact, and really just a phenomenal album all around. But Blonde is just so transparent and so human, and you know, I definitely have a lot of good memories of that record, and I really do think that it's something that is just so pristine and so timeless and so layered. So I'm really having a hard time making that choice. Coming down to this final gauntlet, it's going to be tough. I may slightly give the edge because of the Internet, but some days I really would take Blonde. So I'm gonna break it down like this. I think musically I'll take Internet, but lyrically I'll take Blonde. And it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's the best.
All right. No, hey, it's tough. You encounter albums like that, really. If it's really hard to choose because each person has their own preference, but if you're pitting two great albums against one another, which are really amazing in their own respective ways, it's kind of hard to choose. So yeah, you saying that you'll take this one for lyrics and this one for something else, it's understandable, of course, you know.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, again, my answer could change tomorrow.
Yeah,
but that's it for now. What else do we want to discuss about this record? Any other thoughts or observations we have about this record we want to divulge into?
Yeah, there's like one thing I want to mention about because of the internet, that it doesn't have to do anything with the record in particular. It's just the time that this record was released. So it's like 2013 because the internet came out. And I just want to say that I want to go back in time to that year because there were so many big releases that came out.
Oh, no way. 2013 was a great year.
Yeah, like Yeezus came out that year. Like J. Cole formed Sinner. Mac Miller's watching movies with the sound off. And also in hip hop during that time, that is literally the year where a lot of these big name hip hop and artists and rappers today, they were just up and coming. Like you have Gambino, yeah, Mac Miller, Chance the Rapper, who was featured on Because of the Internet, Schoolboy Q, Vince Staples, ASAP Rocky, like all these big names in hip hop, Earl Sweatshirt, like all these big names in hip hop, they were just starting out around that time, and they've gone so much bigger. So this is like the era where they were just up and coming, and you could see them all just like emerging, just being stars in the just waiting to be stars in a way. And they all came around the same time. So that era of hip hop to me is like one of the best eras, really, because in the long term, it worked out for all of them, really. They put out so many great projects in the rest of the decade. It's like, if you trace it back, 2013 really is one of the biggest years. Kendrick Lamar even came out around that time too.
That's the
biggest guy. How did I forget him? He's like, Good Kid, Mad City came out around that time too. So yeah, all those rappers I mentioned, they are huge now, and they are respected, and everyone loves all those guys' music, really. So
yeah, I mean, I actually didn't even think about that, so you brought it up. That's a really great point. 2013 was a year, not just in rapping, but for this sake, we'll kind of go towards the hip hop R&B. Yeah, definitely a definitive year. Even Frank Ocean himself was riding off of Channel Orange at that time.
Ocean too, with Channel Orange also, basically.
So yeah, I definitely
even Frank Ocean too, even like all these guys basically. So
it's incredible. Yeah, really, yeah, you're really right. I think that what's interesting about that album coming out at that time is it joined a kind of a rank of artists who were, like you were saying before, up and coming, but were paving a way for this new aesthetic of exploration and experimentation and genre fluidity that really to this day has only gotten bigger and grander and richer in the SoundCloud kind of streaming era. So it's interesting how even at that point, these two artists and their records really were kind of foreshadowing where music was going to kind of diverge and evolve. So no, absolutely. Definitely unique, definitely a great take. And it's definitely unique and fascinating to see how much these artists have progressed. Definitely. That's an awesome take.
Yeah, it's like you think about it in 10 years now or so, or farther down the line, that 2012, 2013 was really a new like golden age in hip hop, in my opinion. So
no, I definitely agree.
Yeah.
I mean, we definitely dug pretty deep into these two. I think we definitely come to the conclusion that they're both very strong, unified, and I think definitely trend-setting works of arts. And I think that, we did decide which ones, well, I mean, Adam decided, I sort of decided which ones we like more. But all in all, I think both of these records are unique, dynamic, ambitious, and some of the strongest and most accomplished music in any genre. And I'm really happy that these two records exist. And I think they're both, for the artists that they belong to and the genres they belong to, high watermarks. And I look forward to revisiting these records again, because hearing them again recently, I mean, there's a reason why these records have so much influence. So yeah, definitely think that these two are two of the strongest contenders for some of the most unique or ambitious records of the time.
Yeah, impactful records that stood the test of time from two artists that really stood out within the past decade, who are, highly influential and impactful. And yeah, it's just refreshing to re-listen to both these albums. And yeah, like I said before, because of the internet, just it's refreshing to hear all these different layers that comes out about it, all these different themes that I've missed and catch onto it as I re-listen to them more.
Amen to that. And I had a hard time choosing this time. I didn't suspect.
Yeah, tough decision really with these two. Yeah.
Well, thank you to any listeners at home who are tuning in. And for anybody who is, and also if we for speaking of this episode, I think Adel, if you want to show off that shirt,
Yeah, I mean, like I told you, it's a bias. I was in my mood today. I was in my blonde bag right here.
No shade. And one thing I want to bring up is that you scored a coveted blonde record, which I think is going for quite high now these days. So very jealous about that because that's been on my wish list for years, and I have yet to acquire it.
Yeah, it is. I'm amazed how records are expensive like that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not selling that. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm not selling that.
No, should you?
You'll get my kidney before I sell that. Let me say
that. You heard it here. Any fans who are watching, if you are a fan of both of these records, let us know in the comments which one you prefer, or in anything we missed about this record, anything you want to teach us about, because I think these records spark endless conversation. I'd love to keep it rolling.
Oh yeah, totally. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe here too. So
absolutely. Till next time. I'm Kenny.
And I'm Adel.
And this is
Clash of the Titles.
See you guys soon.